This is Artemis Launch Control. We are currently 8 hours and 6 minutes and counting from the opening of today's launch window for the Artemis II mission. Now that launch window opens at 6:24 p.m. Eastern Time this evening. Teams do have a 2-hour launch window, which means that if we don't launch right at 6:24, they do have an additional 2 hours in which they can try to launch. Now the launch team, which we see here on our screen, they're currently in firing room 1 at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida. They're in the process of loading liquid propellant onto the SLS rocket. Now it's not just the launch team that's here in the firing room that is helping and is on console for today's launch, but we also have supporting teams across the country that are tuning into this countdown. One of those teams is actually the Artemis mission management team. They recently just got here on console. They have a separate section and room. If you actually look, it's to the right-hand side of our launch director and assistant launch director, Charlie Blackwell Thompson and Jeremy Graber, respectively. Over there on the right-hand side where you kind of see that glass enclosure structure, in there is where our Artemis mission management team will sit for the duration of today's countdown. Now, they just recently arrived on console. And apart from the mission management team, we also have the mission control team at NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston and the SLS Engineering and Support Center at NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center. And this doesn't include the other several contractor locations that are also around the country supporting this launch and this mission. So again, you have our prime main launch team that is here in firing room 1, Charlie Blackwell Thompson. You see there she's wearing a green blazer. She's our launch director leading this team. But then there are also supporting teams that are also assisting the launch team throughout today's countdown. That includes the Artemis mission management team, the mission control team in Houston, and the SLS Engineering and Support Center at NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center, in addition to several contractor locations that are located around the country. Now, as we mentioned, we are currently in our propellant loading operations for the SLS rocket. Teams are currently in fast fill for both core stage liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen. The core stage is the first stage of the SLS rocket. Here's a great graphic where you can see where we currently are at in our tanking operations. And you'll see above the core stage, we have also started our loading operations in the interim cryogenic propulsion stage. This is the second stage of the SLS rocket. Now, we have not started loading liquid oxygen yet. I'll report out when that is underway. But in the meantime, we are good with we are in the process of loading liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen on the core stage and liquid hydrogen on the upper stage. I'll report out when we are now starting our liquid oxygen operations on the upper stage. Welcome back. This is Artemis Launch Control. We're currently 8 hours and 1 minute and counting from the opening of today's launch window for the Artemis II mission. I'm Antonia Jaramillo in NASA Communications, and I, along with our fellow commentators, will be taking you through today's countdown. And actually joining me currently in the room here in Firing Room 1 is our Assistant Launch Director, Jeremy Graver. Jeremy, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
No problem. Good morning, Tony. Happy to be here.
You know, Jeremy, I think we recently heard the call out that our flight crew, our astronauts, they just got their wake-up call. Can you run us through kind of what the rest of the day now looks like for them?
Absolutely, yeah. They were woken up just a little while ago. They'll get up as most of us do on a busy, exciting day. Get up, they'll get their breakfast. They'll kind of get into the groove of the day. They'll go through multiple meetings and discussions just to understand where we are. In a little while, the launch director and our flight director will provide a weather briefing for the flight crew to talk about all of the weather potentials that could play into today's launch opportunity. Once that's complete, they will then start getting suited up, and they'll head to the suit room, start doing all their preparations from a suit up perspective. As that's completed, they'll be checking with us to make sure that we're ready for them to come to the pad, and then they'll be on their way headed out to the pad in the Astrovan, ready to get out to launch pad 39B, get up on top of the mobile launcher onto the 274-foot level, go across the crew access arm into the white room, and enter the Orion spacecraft. So we're really excited for those events later today.
It is. It's a very busy and exciting day, like you mentioned. I hope they got some good rest and didn't, wake up a bunch of times throughout the night. I know I certainly did, but just because of pure excitement, like you mentioned. Now let's shift focus back on the rocket. How's propellant loading going?
Everything is going very well right now. As I stepped off console to come in here, the core stage LH2 tank was about 95% loaded. The upper stage is probably about halfway and moving towards their completion for LH2. The liquid oxygen side of the core stage is in fast fill as well, and proceeding well, and we will be getting into the upper stage LO2 loading in a little while. So all things moving per schedule and working towards that plan for the day.
That is great news. And actually, I think we just heard that they got the go for transitioning into that liquid hydrogen on the core stage 2 topping. So, like you said, we're getting very close.
Absolutely.
That is exciting, so can you tell us a little bit then about those upcoming milestones once we finish that propellant loading on all 4 tanks?
Yeah, so it's absolutely critical for us to get into what we call stable replenish on all stages. And what that means is the liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen tanks on both the core stage and the interim cryopropulsion stage, or ICPS, are fully loaded, and we are just maintaining that level of loading. And that's a very quiescent configuration for us, and that's required for us to be in that configuration to then be allowed to send the flight crew, our closeout crew, which is there to assist the flight crew getting on board Orion. We need to be in that stable replenish configuration to be able to send those crews out to the launch pad. And as we send those crews out, that is really our press and our push to launch. We'll get the crew on board. They go through a number of checks, communication checks, system checks, and then our closeout crew's job is to back out of the crew module, close all of our hatches, get us in configuration to be able to then the closeout crew to leave the pad, and that puts us in the configuration to allow us to proceed through the rest of launch countdown as we proceed down to our final hold at T-minus 10 minutes, where we do all of our launch polls and determine that we are ready to pick up with what we call terminal count, which is from T-minus 10 minutes down to launch at T0. And really excited to get to all of those milestones as we proceed through the day.
We are all very excited. We're rooting for you guys, watching along. And as you mentioned, the reason to get to all stages replenished first is because that's the point we're at the safest configuration to send people back to the launch pad, correct?
That is absolutely correct. It is a very stable configuration. It's the safe configuration that we require to ensure that we're ready to send those crews out to the pad.
Jeremy Graver, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. We're rooting for you, wishing you the best of luck, and we'll let you get back on console.
Excellent. Thank you, Tony. Appreciate it. Go Artemis.
Go Artemis. All right, and so just to quickly recap, we are now in our topping phase for liquid hydrogen on the core stage. We are still in fast fill on the liquid oxygen side for the core stage, and also fast fill for the upper stage liquid hydrogen tank. I'll report back once we have entered our topping phase for liquid oxygen on the core stage. This is Artemis Launch Control. We are currently 7 hours and 47 minutes and counting from the opening of today's launch window for NASA's Artemis II mission. That launch window opens at 6:24 p.m. Eastern Time this evening. Now the teams do have a 2-hour launch window, so that means if we can't launch right at 6:24, that's okay. They still have an additional 2 hours in which they can attempt to launch. Now currently the Artemis launch team, which you see on your screen there, they are in the process of loading cryogenic or super cold liquid propellant onto the SLS or the Space Launch System rocket. The teams actually just reported that we have completed loading liquid hydrogen onto the core stage of the rocket. Now the core stage is the first stage of that SLS rocket. There's a great graphic representation of where we currently are in our tanking operations. So as you see, we are at 100% level for the liquid hydrogen tank on the core stage. So that means we are now, the teams are just going to be constantly replenishing that tank as some of that liquid starts boiling off into a gas due to the temperatures as it starts warming up. So teams will therefore replenish it constantly to maintain this 100% flight level. Now, as you can see, right above the hydrogen tank sits our liquid oxygen tank. That's currently 70% of the way filled. And then on our upper stage, or the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, this is the rocket stage that sits on top of the core stage. We are currently in our fast fill operations for liquid hydrogen on that upper stage. Teams have not started liquid oxygen for the upper stage, and that is totally normal. That is part of the countdown. We aren't scheduled to start our upper stage liquid oxygen loading operations until we start getting into, so we get much further into our loading operations for the liquid oxygen tank on the core stage. So again, we are now in replenish for the core stage liquid hydrogen tank, and we are in fast fill for the liquid oxygen tank on the core stage and the liquid hydrogen tank on the upper stage. Now, a quick recap on how the whole tanking loading process goes. Teams will first start with what is called chill down. So prior to us actually starting to load the super cold propellant onto the rocket, they will first chill down all of the systems and lines. This is done to make sure that it is able to receive these super cold temperatures. In order for hydrogen to be in a liquid state, it needs to be negative 423 degrees Fahrenheit. Oxygen in a liquid state is negative 297 degrees Fahrenheit. So very, very cold temperatures. And as such, we want to make sure that we are conditioning all of the systems to be able to receive those cryogenic temperatures so that we aren't shocking the hardware and we're not causing any potential damage unnecessarily. Now, following chill down, we will transition into what is called into slow fill on the core stage. Now, slow fill, as the name suggests, refers to slowly starting to feed that propellant onto the rocket. This officially marks the start of our propellant loading. Teams actually got into slow fill for the liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen tanks on the core stage earlier this morning, a little bit before 9 a.m. Following slow fill is then when we transition into fast fill. This is where we stay for the majority of our tanking loading operations. Similarly to slow fill, fast fill refers to loading propellant at a much faster rate. And that is currently where the liquid oxygen tank state is in. We are in fast fill for liquid oxygen tank on the core stage. Now, after fast fill, we transition into topping. This is the last little bit that is needed to fill the tanks to 100% level. Hence why we're topping it off. Following topping, we are now at 100%. And so now we transition into replenish mode. Replenish just means we're going to be constantly replenishing these tanks so that we make sure we are again at 100% flight level. Now you see on your screen there, we can see some venting coming off the rocket. This is totally expected as we begin our loading operations. Some of that liquid propellant starts warming up. It'll start to boil off and vent outside of the rocket. Hence why we see some of that gas getting expended from down underneath where the engines are at the bottom, and also a little bit at the top where the upper stage is located. So again, an expected condition. Now let's take you through the rocket a little bit. See up there on your screen, we have the Orion spacecraft. Underneath there is the Orion stage adapter. The Orion stage adapter is what houses our secondary payloads, or these scientific CubeSats. They're shoebox-sized scientific experiments that will go to space following separation from the upper stage and the spacecraft. It's also the smallest section of the SLS rocket at only 5 feet. Underneath the Orion stage adapter sits the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, or that second stage. Underneath there is our core stage, or the first stage of the rocket. Now the core stage, it consists of the propellant tanks, the ducts, the valves, avionics, and it also houses the 4 RS-25 engines that are down there at the bottom. Next to the core stage, we have our 2 solid rocket boosters. Each is taller than the Statue of Liberty. Now on those rocket boosters, you can see our NASA worm. The worm logo spans 25 feet end to end, or roughly the length of 1 booster motor segment. Now we actually have 5 segments each on each booster, so 10 segments total. It's actually 1 segment more than what was used during the space shuttle program. Now you should also be able to see some black and white markings around the rocket. Now these are used for imagery for the SLS engineering and support team that's based out at NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. They use this for imagery to track and guide the rocket after liftoff and during ascent. And it will also be used in their post-flight analysis. Now the orange color of the core stage is the thermal protection system, or that spray-on foam insulation. Now this provides the thermal protection for every part of the rocket. And when the foam is applied, it gives the rocket this light yellow color that the sun's ultraviolet rays eventually tan, giving our SLS rocket its famous butterscotch color. So again, to quickly recap, we are in replenish mode for the core stage liquid hydrogen tank. We are about 75% of the way filled on our liquid oxygen tank on the core stage. But we're still in fast fill. I'll let you know when we transition into topping for the core stage liquid oxygen tank. And then on the upper stage, teams are also in fast fill for liquid hydrogen. And they have not started the liquid oxygen operations on the upper stage yet. I'll make sure to report out all of these milestones as they're underway. This is Artemis Launch Control. We are currently 7 hours and 30 minutes and counting from the opening of today's launch window for the Artemis II mission. That launch window opens at 6:24 p.m. Eastern Time, and teams do have a 2-hour launch window, which means that if we don't launch right at the beginning at 6:24, they do have an additional 2 hours in which they can attempt to launch. Our launch team is currently in Firing Room 1 at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida and are in the process of loading cryogenic or super cold liquid propellant onto the SLS or the Space Launch System rocket. Now, teams did just complete fast fill for the liquid hydrogen tank on the upper stage or our interim cryogenic propulsion stage. Now, fast fill refers to loading propellant at a faster rate. This is preceded by chill down, which gets the system ready to receive these super cold temperatures. And then following fast fill, teams will then transition into topping and replenish. I'll get more into those, but before that, again, we just finished fast fill for the liquid hydrogen tank on the upper stage, and teams are now performing, before they start topping, what is called a vent and relief test. This test is basically just pressurizing the upper stage tanks with heliums to test the relief capabilities of the tank pressure to make sure that it can handle that pressure capability during flight. So between fast fill and topping, teams will perform this test on both the liquid hydrogen and the liquid oxygen tanks on the upper stage. Following that test completion, we will then transition into topping, which just means finishing loading the rest of the tank to 100%. Following topping, we enter what is called replenish mode, which basically just means that now we are going to be replenishing these tanks at 100% level, because as we naturally get throughout the countdown, that propellant is going to start warming up and it'll start boiling and venting off, as you can see on your screen there what is happening. So because of that, and because the teams want to make sure that they still have 100% level in all 4 tanks, the 2 on the upper stage and the 2 on the core stage or the first stage of the rocket, they continuously replenish the tanks until the final 10 minutes of the launch countdown, or what is known as terminal count. Now, speaking of replenish mode, we are currently in replenish mode for the core stage liquid hydrogen tank. So we were just talking about how we finished fast fill on the upper stage liquid hydrogen tank. We are also then in replenish mode for the core stage liquid hydrogen tank. On the liquid oxygen side, we are still in fast fill for the core stage liquid oxygen. And then on the upper stage, we haven't started those liquid oxygen operations yet. The teams want to wait until we are a little bit further along in the core stage liquid oxygen loading operations before we transition into that upper stage loading operation. Now, in total, the SLS and Orion spacecraft are 322 feet tall. At liftoff, SLS produces 8.8 million pounds of thrust. A little bit more than the Saturn V rocket that was used during the Apollo missions, which were roughly 7.5 million pounds of thrust to send those astronauts to the moon. With our SLS rocket, though, you don't just have those liquid fuel tanks that are fueling the rocket, but you also have 2 solid rocket boosters that are attached on either side. You see there on your screen right there? They also help provide that extra push and that thrust right at liftoff. Now, Let's go up a little bit on the rocket, go back to our upper or our second stage, our interim cryogenic propulsion stage. For those that have been following us along since Artemis I, you might remember that the interim cryogenic propulsion stage for Artemis I provided the big push to send the Orion spacecraft on its way to the moon. For Artemis II, however, it's going to be a little different. And the reason for that is because Artemis II is NASA's first crewed test flight, meaning we are sending astronauts on board this rocket for the first time. And because of that, we are going to have the capability to practice a bunch of different systems and tests and operations that we couldn't do if it were uncrewed. One of these operations is what is called the proximity operation demonstration. This involves the upper stage, or that interim cryogenic propulsion stage, and the Orion spacecraft practicing proximity maneuvers where the Orion spacecraft will practice approaching and getting away from the upper stage in a high Earth orbit. The reason teams want to practice this is in preparation for Artemis III and future Artemis missions for when Orion docks with our lunar landing systems. And so because of this, this means that the interim cryogenic propulsion stage will be separating from Orion much sooner. Meaning that following this demonstration, it will be Orion's European service module that will actually send the spacecraft on its trajectory to the moon. It will perform what is called the translunar injection burn. Now, this proximity operation is scheduled to happen during the first day of flight, so pretty soon. And NASA will be providing you with 24/7 live coverage starting right now as we have been going through our propellant loading operations, and we will continue throughout the course of the entire mission, including all of the splashdown operations. Artemis II will send NASA astronauts Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, and Christina Cook, and Canadian Space Agency astronaut Jeremy Hansen on a 10-day mission around the moon and back. Orion is scheduled to splash down off the coast of San Diego in the Pacific Ocean. So to quickly recap, teams are in the process of performing a vent and relief test on the liquid hydrogen tank on the upper stage, following finishing their fast fill operations. Again, this test is to just test the tanks that they can handle the pressure that will be happening during this first day of flight. Following this test, we will then transition into our topping phase on the upper stage liquid hydrogen tank, and it'll then transition to replenish. On the core stage, meanwhile, we are still in fast fill for the liquid oxygen tank, and we are in replenish for liquid hydrogen. Now, this is a very big and important milestone to me because, again, for those that have been following us along, especially with Artemis II, during our fast fill operations on the core stage liquid hydrogen tank during wet dress rehearsal 1, that was our first test of this Artemis II moon rocket where we tested loading the propellants on board. Teams experienced the liquid hydrogen leaks shortly after getting into fast fill during that first test. They then performed a second wet dress rehearsal where they did not see any major leaks. Tanking loading operations went very smoothly, and it was a very successful test. And so it's great to see that throughout today's countdown for launch, there also weren't any significant issues or leaks reported during our liquid hydrogen loading phase on the core stage. So we are now in replenish mode for liquid hydrogen. We're about 84% of the way on the liquid oxygen tank. And we're also almost there on the upper stage for liquid hydrogen. Now I'll report out once liquid oxygen operations for the upper stage are also underway. Welcome back. This is Artemis Launch Control. We are currently 7 hours and 9 minutes and counting from the opening of today's launch window for the Artemis II mission. Our Artemis launch team is currently in the process of loading liquid propellant onto the SLS or Space Launch System rocket. Teams just reported out that we are in our topping phase. For the upper stage liquid hydrogen tank, this means we are almost at 100%, if not pretty much there on that upper stage tank. The upper stage is the second stage of the SLS rocket. Here's a graphic representation where we can see where we're currently at in our tanking operations. That means we have now finished loading our liquid hydrogen on both the core stage and the upper stage. As I said, we're in that topping phase to get us to 100%. And afterwards, we'll then transition into replenish mode to stay at 100% level. You can see on the core stage, we are already at the replenish mode. If you see that 100% level right there. And we also just got confirmation that we are also in replenish for the upper stage liquid hydrogen tank. Now on the liquid oxygen side, we still have a little bit to go. We're almost there on the liquid oxygen tank for the core stage. You see roughly 92% of the way filled. And we haven't started our liquid oxygen propellant loading operations on the upper stage. Teams are getting ready to start chilling down that tank. Teams do this to make sure that all of the systems and lines are ready to receive these cryogenic temperatures. As you can see on your screen there, for hydrogen to stay in a liquid state, it must be negative 423 degrees Fahrenheit. Oxygen, meanwhile, is negative 297 degrees Fahrenheit. So these super cold temperatures, we want to make sure that the rocket is able to receive them without damaging any of the hardware on board. So we'll start with chilling down that liquid oxygen tank and lines before we actually start loading it onto the upper stage. I'll report back once that step is underway. As a reminder, our launch window opens at 6:24 p.m. Eastern Time this evening. Teams do have a 2-hour launch window, so that means if we don't launch right at 6:24, that is okay. They still have additional opportunities throughout that 2-hour launch window. Now, NASA's providing 24/7 live coverage throughout this entire mission, beginning with our propellant loading operations that is currently underway. And as we continue our coverage this morning, we are also, and we continue monitoring all of our loading operations. We thank you for following us along. Part of our live coverage will, of course, include our launch this evening. That live launch coverage for Artemis II will continue right here at the beginning at approximately 12:50 p.m. Eastern Time. You can continue watching on our NASA's YouTube channel, as well as on NASA Plus and the other NASA social media channels. Again, we are providing 24/7 live coverage. So following launch, the show doesn't end there. We have a 10-day mission around the moon. And then following that, we're coming back home. And we will be covering all of those splashdown operations as well. Artemis II is a test flight. It is NASA's first crewed Artemis mission. We will be sending NASA astronaut Reed Wiseman, who serves as the commander, Victor Glover, the pilot, and mission specialist Christina Cook. And then we're also sending Canadian Space Agency astronaut Jeremy Hansen, who serves as the other mission specialist for this mission. So to quickly recap, we are in replenish for both liquid hydrogen tanks on the core stage and the upper stage of our SLS or Space Launch System rocket. And we are getting very close to being almost all the way full on the liquid oxygen tank in the core stage. I'll make sure to report out once we start entering topping for the liquid oxygen tank in the core stage. Again, that refers to the last little bit that is needed to get us to 100%. And I'll also make sure to let folks know when our chill down operations are in work on the upper stage liquid oxygen tank. As a reminder, all of this propellant that are on board these 4 tanks of these two rocket stages, they feed the engines that are underneath and then provide the power and the push to send the Orion spacecraft on its voyage to the moon. This is Artemis Launch Control. We are currently 6 hours and 49 minutes and counting from the opening of today's launch window for NASA's Artemis II mission. That launch window opens at 6:24 p.m. Eastern Time this evening, and we do have a 2-hour launch window, which means that if we don't launch right at the start at 6:24 p.m., that is okay. Teams still have an additional 2 hours in which they can try to launch the SLS or Space Launch System rocket and the Orion spacecraft. Now, the Artemis launch team is currently in the process of loading cryogenic or super cold liquid propellant onto the SLS rocket. We are currently in what is called replenish mode for our liquid hydrogen tanks on board the SLS core stage and the interim cryogenic propulsion stage. These are the two stages on the SLS rocket. Now, replenish mode means that we have finished loading hydrogen on board both of these rockets. That means they are at 100% level. And teams are just constantly replenishing the tanks to make sure that they stay at 100%. Since, as throughout the countdown, that liquid propellant will start boiling off as it starts warming up, and it will then be vented out and released from the rocket, which you can see there on your screen. Now, on the liquid oxygen side, teams are now in topping phase for the core stage liquid oxygen tank. Topping is the in-between state of fast fill and replenish mode. Fast fill is where we spend the most of the time loading propellants. We load it at a much faster rate. Then once we reach a certain point, we will transition into topping to finish loading the tank to 100%. That is now where we are currently at in the core stage liquid oxygen tank. And following topping, we then transition into replenish. So we're in core stage liquid oxygen topping. We're in topping for the core stage liquid oxygen tank. And we are in replenish mode for both tanks on the liquid hydrogen, on the core stage and the upper stage. Now, meanwhile, on the liquid oxygen tank on the upper stage, teams just reported that they have now started chill down for that upper stage tank. This is the first step that is needed before we actually start flowing and loading that propellant on board. The reason this is done is to chill down the systems in line so they are ready to receive those super cold temperatures and not cause any potential damage to the hardware. For reference, oxygen needs to be negative 297 degrees Fahrenheit to be in a liquid state, and hydrogen, negative 423 degrees Fahrenheit. So very, very cold temperatures that the rocket is dealing with right now. Now again, we are underway for the Artemis II mission. This is the second Artemis mission in NASA's Artemis program. Artemis 1 was an uncrewed test flight. Artemis 2 will be the first crewed test flight. This will be the first time we send astronauts on board our Orion spacecraft. We'll be sending our commander Reed Wiseman, our pilot Victor Glover, and mission specialists Christina Cook and Jeremy Hansen on a 10-day mission around the moon. Now, from the rocket side, there aren't that many changes from Artemis 1 to Artemis 2. Most of the major sections of SLS really remain unchanged. Some of the differences are more in the details to really just provide our astronauts with a better ride in space. Some of those include some optical targets that are now on the upper stage as visual cues during the proximity operation demonstration. This will be a test for the astronauts to practice maneuvering Orion and practice approaching the upper stage while it's in a high Earth orbit. Another improvement for SLS was an improved navigation system. Also, communications capability between the ground stations and the U.S. Space Force Space Launch Delta 45, which controls the eastern range. That is responsible for kind of helping dictate when we are allowed to launch here off the Space Coast in Florida. Now, all of the 4 tanks on the upper stage and the core stage, they feed the engines that are down below. At liftoff, the 4 RS-25 engines will operate for the first 8 minutes during flight. The 2 solid rocket boosters that are on either side, those operate for only 2 minutes, and they provide 75% of the power at liftoff. So to quickly recap, we are in replenish for our both liquid hydrogen tanks. We entered topping for the liquid oxygen tank on the core stage. That means very, very soon we'll be in replenish mode for that tank as well. And we are in our chill down operations for the liquid oxygen tank on the upper stage. Pretty soon we will be entering fast fill. I'll report out when that is underway. This is Artemis Launch Control. We are currently 6 hours and 38 minutes and counting from the opening of today's launch window for the Artemis II mission. That launch window opens at 6:24 p.m. Eastern Time this evening, and teams do have a 2-hour launch window in which they can attempt to launch the SLS, or the Space Launch System rocket, and Orion spacecraft. The Artemis launch team is currently loading cryogenic or super cold liquid propellant onto SLS. We are currently in replenish mode for both liquid hydrogen tanks on the 2 stages of our SLS rocket. We're still in our topping phase on the core stage liquid oxygen tank. That means we're just finishing it up. You can see there it looks almost all the way full. And following that, it will enter into what is also into its replenish mode as well. The liquid oxygen tank on the upper stage, meanwhile, is now in fast fill. So that means all 4 tanks are now receiving propellant. Following fast fill on the liquid oxygen tank for the upper stage, teams will perform that vent and relief test that they also did for the liquid hydrogen side on the upper stage. This test is again just to test the relief capabilities to make sure that the upper stage can handle the pressure that will be introduced at liftoff and during launch. Following that, it will then enter topping and will then go to replenish mode as well. Once we are in replenish mode for all tanks, that'll be the signal to the launch team to tell our astronauts that they are ready to start heading out to the launch pad and get on board their Orion spacecraft. Now, Artemis II is a test flight, and it is NASA's first Artemis crewed mission. That means this will be the first time that our astronauts, our Commander Reed Wiseman, pilot Victor Glover, and mission specialists Christina Cook and Jeremy Hansen, they will be the first to experience launch and flight atop SLS. The rocket hits a maximum speed of 22,670 miles per hour. And our astronauts will get to experience the entire ride. So to quickly recap, we are in replenish mode for both liquid hydrogen tanks. We are in topping, meaning we are finishing up loading liquid oxygen on the core stage. That is the first stage of the rocket. And we are in fast fill for the liquid oxygen tank on our second stage, or that interim cryogenic propulsion stage. I'll report out once we have also entered replenish mode for the core stage liquid oxygen tank. This is Artemis Launch Control. We are currently 6 hours and 22 minutes and counting from the opening of today's launch window for the Artemis II mission. The launch team is currently in the process of loading cryogenic or super cold liquid propellant onto the SLS or the Space Launch System rocket. We're currently in replenish mode for both liquid hydrogen tanks on both the first stage and the second stage of the rocket. And then on the liquid oxygen side, we are in fast fill for the liquid oxygen tank on the upper stage. And then we are getting ready to get into our replenish mode for the liquid oxygen tank on the core stage. We are still in that topping phase. Finishing loading the propellant tank to 100%, at which point then teams will transition into replenish mode as well, which just means that we are going to constantly be replenishing these tanks at 100% level. Now today's launch window opens at 6:24 p.m. Teams do have a 2-hour launch window, which means if we don't launch right on time, they do have an additional 2 hours in which they can attempt to launch. For those of you just joining us, NASA will be providing 24/7 live coverage of this entire mission, starting with our propellant loading operations that are currently underway. Thank you so much for everyone that's been following along. Our live launch coverage of Artemis II will continue right here, beginning at approximately 12:50 p.m. where the rest of my NASA commentators will be chiming in on how the rest of today's countdown goes. And we'll take you through the rest of the mission. Now, Artemis II is a test flight. It will be the first mission that sends astronauts on board SLS and Orion. You can see a photo on your screen there of our Artemis II crew. We have our commander, Reed Wiseman, on the right-hand side. Then we have our 2 mission specialists in the middle, Christina Cook, and then Canadian Space Agency astronaut Jeremy Hansen. All the way on the left is our pilot, Victor Glover. All 4 of them woke up not too long ago at around 9:25 a.m. this morning. Not a terrible wake-up call. In that time, they've been getting ready, having breakfast, getting some briefings. And they'll get one more briefing. It's the flight crew weather brief, where they'll get a status on where we are in the countdown, what the current forecast looks like. Following that brief, they will then start their suit-up operations before they go out to the launch pad and board their spacecraft. And teams did report that we have now entered replenish mode for the core stage liquid oxygen tank. So we are now in replenish for both liquid hydrogen tanks on the core stage and the upper stage. And we are also in replenish mode for the core stage liquid oxygen tank. On the upper stage liquid oxygen tank, meanwhile, we are still in fast fill. And I'll report out once then we transition from fast fill onto the next step, which will again be that vent and relief test. This is pressurizing the upper stage tanks with heliums to test the relief capabilities of the tank pressure to make sure that it can handle that capability during flight. Following that test, teams will then start topping on the liquid oxygen tank, and will then, after topping, will then transition into replenish mode as well. I'll report out when that's underway. This is Artemis Launch Control. We are currently 6 hours and 8 minutes and counting from the opening of today's launch window for the Artemis II mission. Now the launch window opens at 6:24 p.m. Eastern Time this evening, and teams do have a 2-hour launch window, which means that they have 2 hours in which they can try to launch the SLS, or the Space Launch System rocket, and Orion spacecraft that will send NASA astronauts Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Cook, and Canadian Space Agency astronaut Jeremy Hansen on a 10-day mission around the moon and back. Now, the launch team is currently in the process of loading cryogenic or super cold liquid propellant onto the SLS rocket. The propellants that are used to power SLS are liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen. We are currently in our replenish phase for both liquid hydrogen tanks on the two stages of the rocket. That is both the core stage and the interim cryogenic propulsion stage. Replenish mode just basically means that now these tanks are at 100% level, and teams are going to constantly be replenishing them as they start to warm up and boil off. You can see some of that gas that's being vented off the rocket there. That's normal. Teams totally expect to see that, and because of that, we have then a replenish valve to constantly be replenishing the tank with that liquid propellant, so we make sure that we are 100% level and we're not losing any propellants in the tank. The reason that you see some of that venting happening is because as we get throughout the countdown and the temperatures start to rise, that liquid propellant will become a gas, and so it'll start boiling off and then it'll vent outside the rocket. Hence the need for a replenish valve. So we are in replenish for both liquid hydrogen tanks. We are also in replenish for the core stage liquid oxygen tank. And we are in fast fill for the upper stage, or that interim cryogenic propulsion stage, liquid oxygen tank. Now, fast fill is the main portion of our propellant loading operations, where teams are actively loading that propellant at a much faster rate. Now, following fast fill, teams transition into what is called topping. As the name suggests, it just means to top off the tanks. And then following topping, we enter what is replenish. So once we are at replenish for the liquid oxygen tank on the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, we're going to enter what is called all stages in replenish. This means that all 4 tanks on the SLS rocket are fully fueled, and our astronauts are ready then to go and head out to the launch pad when they get the go from our launch director, Charlie Blackwell Thompson. Now, coming up shortly, our astronauts will be joining in on a flight crew weather brief with our launch director, as well as with the flight director in Houston and the launch weather officer. They'll provide a quick status on how the forecast looks for the rest of today's countdown, as well as where we currently are in our countdown operations. A little earlier, the launch weather officer did let our launch director know that we might get some showers in about 2 hours. However, there is no lightning threat, and they will plan on discussing this again during the flight crew weather brief. Currently, teams are forecasting 80% go for weather conditions during that 2-hour launch window. So again, to quickly recap, we are in replenish mode for both liquid hydrogen tanks. We are also in replenish mode on the liquid oxygen tank on the core stage. That is the first stage of the SLS rocket. And we're in fast fill for the liquid oxygen tank on the upper stage. I'll report out when we have transitioned from fast fill and onto topping. This is Artemis Launch Control. We are currently 5 hours and 42 minutes and counting from the opening of today's launch window for the Artemis II mission. That launch window officially opens at 6:24 p.m. Eastern Time, and teams do have a 2-hour launch window, which means that they have additional opportunities if they don't meet the beginning of that window. Now, joining me is Artemis Launch Director Charlie Blackwell Thompson. Charlie, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Oh, you're more than welcome. It's great to be here, Tony.
It sure is. Now, we know that you just conducted a flight crew weather brief with our astronauts as well as teams and mission control and our launch weather officer. Do you mind providing us kind of how that went and what we can expect?
Yes, the weather brief went really well. What we do during that weather brief is we give the flight crew a summary of where we are in our tanking, what's left, and of course we have our core stage and our upper stage fully loaded with LH2 and we're in replenish, and we are just finishing up our LO2 or liquid oxygen load into the upper stage. We provided that status along with any nonconformances that the crew might be interested in, and then we went through the weather. And so our weather from our launch weather officer remains at a 80% likelihood of go today and a 20% chance of violation. We are watching some precip that is making its way toward the pad, but we expect that that is going to dissipate as we get closer to the opening of our window. So really good to hear the crew's voices and to talk through a day of launch ops. You know, it's something that we simulate, but there's nothing like the real day.
Absolutely, I can only imagine, and it's great news to hear that we are still 80% go. Those are very, very favorable conditions. Let's hope it stays that way. You mentioned we're getting closer to reaching what is called all stages in stable replenish. That means that we will have all 4 tanks at 100% flight level. Charlie, can you walk us through then what are some of those upcoming milestones once we reach all stages replenish?
Absolutely. So one of the big milestones when you reach stable replenish on all stages is you begin to send the closeout crew into the pad, and so we're just a few minutes away from getting into that, and we'll deploy them to the pad and they'll start getting ready for the flight crew. And then of course shortly after that is the exciting milestone of seeing the crew walk out of the operations and checkout building and make their way to the pad. And that's certainly something that we've been waiting a very long time to see. It's going to be very exciting, I think, certainly for our team. It'll be exciting for our country, and it'll be exciting for people all over the world who are watching our crew head to the pad, knowing that we are just about 5 hours or so from launch.
You couldn't have said it any better. This is very exciting for the entire world. We cannot wait for that moment when we see our astronauts depart their crew quarters and head to the pad. Charlie, thank you so much for taking the chance to speak with us today. We are rooting for you. We're wishing you the best of luck in today's countdown, and we'll let you get back on console.
All right. Thank you, Tony. Appreciate the opportunity to chat with you, and go Artemis.
Go Artemis. All right, so to quickly recap, we are in replenish mode for both liquid hydrogen tanks, and we are getting ready to also hit replenish mode on the liquid oxygen tanks for both of those. We will report out when that is underway. This is Artemis Launch Control. We are currently 5 hours and 37 minutes and counting from the opening of today's launch window for NASA's Artemis II mission. Now, the launch team is currently in the process of loading cryogenic or liquid propellant onto the SLS rocket. You see our launch team there in firing room 1, and you actually can see our NASA administrator, Jared Isaacman. He just joined the room to greet our launch director, Charlie Blackwell Thompson, and our assistant launch director, Jeremy Graver. Now, to quickly recap, we started our propellant loading operations at 8:35 a.m. Eastern Time. That was after we had chilled down the core stage systems lines, and after we had been given the go from our launch director to start our tanking operations. So after 8:35, we started again slow fill. A little bit after that, at 9:25, our astronauts got their scheduled wake-up call. Following slow fill on the core stage, we then transitioned into fast fill. Once we were in fast fill for the core stage, we then started our upper stage loading operations. We started first with hydrogen. Started chilling down the liquid hydrogen tank on the upper stage at roughly 9:36 a.m. and then we got into fast fill at 9:51 a.m. Following that, we entered then our topping phase on the core stage liquid hydrogen tank. Topping refers to finishing up that last little bit to get to 100%, and then we transitioned into replenish. We did the same thing for the core stage liquid oxygen tank, as well as for the liquid hydrogen tank on the upper stage. Now all that's left is to enter replenish mode for the liquid oxygen tank on our upper stage, and we will enter what is called all stages replenish. This means that now all 4 tanks will be at 100% level. Once we reach this stage, this will be the signal for our launch team to let our astronauts know that they have the clear to enter the launch pad and go and enter their spacecraft. As a reminder, NASA is providing 24/7 live coverage of this mission. We started this morning at 7:45 a.m. and ran you through our tanking loading operations, and we will continue to do so throughout the rest of today's launch countdown. We will be beginning our live coverage in just a few minutes for that launch, and the rest of our commentators will make sure to take you along through today's countdown. You can see on your screen there how to watch. And as our launch director just recently said when she came on air, let's go Artemis II.
harness some the resources on the moon in order to get us onto Mars later. So we're going to use the moon as a stepping stone to get to Mars, but also we're going to use the moon to learn so much about Earth and about the creation of the solar system. You know, the moon is this untouched witness mark for the Earth and the solar system.
And what I really love is like all the things that we do to get us to explore our universe, all of that technology, all the jobs created to support that, it all benefits us here on Earth.
Yes, definitely. I mean, getting this rocket into orbit takes, you know, 8.8 million pounds of thrust, right? And it's the people on Earth who do that and who create that, the engineers, the scientists. There are so many people who make this mission happen.
And so if all goes well, this crew could travel farther from Earth than any other humans before them and see parts of the moon no one has ever laid eyes on. And now, speaking of laying eyes, here we are in the suit-up room with the Artemis II crew.
Yes. Looks like the commander's getting his comm cap on, so the communication cap. Looks like Victor's already got his on and the helmet going.
He's just stretching out his wrist a little bit, right?
Yes.
And in charge of liftoff today is Launch Director Charlie Blackwell-Thompson. She and her team are just across the street from us inside of the Launch Control Center. They kicked off continuous around-the-clock operations just before 5 p.m. on Monday and started fueling the rocket about 4 hours ago. They have a 2-hour launch window that opens at 6:24 p.m. Eastern Time, which our clock in the upper left-hand corner is counting down to. And, you know, we just heard from Charlie Blackwell-Thompson in our tanking coverage, which was the broadcast just before this one kicked off. And basically, she said weather is 80% go.
Yes, you know, 80%, we will take that. It's a little windy. There's some clouds building, but we're going to keep an eye on it, and 80% is a good number to keep moving today.
Yeah, and what she said was a wave of showers are moving west, but they should be well past the pad by the time we launch again. Hopefully at 6:24 p.m. today.
Hopefully.
All right, so again, let's head back into that suit-up room. We see Reed Wiseman. He is the commander of the Artemis II crew, and Nicole, he is putting on what you guys are calling the communications cap, the comm cap.
Yes, so it's a little bit for protection of his, of his head there, but also you can see the mic booms, and he's got ear cups there so he can hear, the rocket's loud. So you're going to wear hearing protection, but then we also want to be able to talk to Earth and talk to each other. So they're getting that settled, and then he will put the helmet on over that comm cap. That comm cap will also connect into the suit, which then eventually connects into the capsule. Through an umbilical there, so there's a lot of cords and wires. You can see them tuck in that cord under his chin right now.
And so the suits they're wearing, they're called the Orion Crew Survival Suits, or OX suits. And so they're worn for launch and reentry or during high-risk or emergency situations. And I think a lot of people, especially if they're have been following NASA for all these decades now, they're kind of thinking, hey, these look like the suits that our shuttle astronauts used to wear. There is a lot of resemblance here.
That's true. Yeah, they are very similar. NASA does a great job of leveraging the lessons that we learned from previous missions. So dating all the way back to Apollo, some of our first spaceflight missions, we learned lessons about the suits and how to make them better, and we just continued to carry that through all the way into the Artemis mission.
Time now to introduce you to some of our teams today. We have Gary Jordan at NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston. He's going to be inside with the mission control teams, which will take over from Kennedy's launch control team right at liftoff. And then back here at Florida, there's Megan Carter inside Kennedy Space Center's visitor complex, Jasmine Hopkins at a launch viewing location, and then finally Daryl Nail inside the Launch Control Center with the launch team. Now each is going to provide a very unique experience today, starting first with Daryl, who has been closely monitoring the launch countdown for us.
Yeah, and welcome into Firing Room 1, a historic firing room here at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here reporting what's happening as we lead up to countdown and liftoff of Artemis II. So far, looking pretty good. You see the rocket out there on the pad. It is launch day, and we just got that crew weather brief that you were talking about from Launch Director Charlie Blackwell-Thompson to the crew. It looks like a countdown at this point is in good shape, and that's great news. Fueling continues to track well. We just reached all stages replenish. And while we're talking about the fueling, let's talk about that tanking. Pull up the tanking graphic if we could now. That will give us an indication of where we are with tanking, and I can just tell you, as you see from this board right here, we are all stages replenish. So all tanks on board the SLS. The 2 liquid hydrogen, lower stage and upper stage, and 2 liquid oxygen, lower stage and upper stage, are at 100%, and that's exactly where we want to be. This kicked off at 7:30 this morning with a go for cryo load, and here we are roughly about 5 hours later, and we're fully tanked and now in replenish. The amount of propellant on board, roughly 733,000 gallons. That's about an Olympic-sized pool and a half. Huge amount of propellant. It's all flowed in there. The great news there, no leaks, no issues, and we're looking good at this point. So let's talk weather now. The weather, while it is favorable overall, it's not totally clean, and that was hinted at earlier when we talked about the storms. There is, of course, some onshore flow. Currently, our overall attempt percentage stands at 80% chance of acceptable weather conditions at the time of liftoff, which is going to be within our launch window. That's tonight from 6:24 p.m. Eastern Time until 8:24 p.m. Eastern Time. Winds are good. The lightning risk is low. But scattered showers still remain possible around the Cape and including near the pad. So the expectation is that there'll be some more active weather coming our way, but we're expecting it to push to the west. So the watch item is really any isolated shower that could briefly move through the area and trigger a constraint, especially for flight through precipitation. Well, you're looking now inside the astronaut suit-up room, and of course we got the 4 astronauts there. They talked to Charlie Blackwell-Thompson today, and you know, everything looks good there. We're tracking one minor NC issue at this point. We'll talk, it's a non-conformance. We'll talk about that a little bit later in our next hit. But for now, again, looking good. And of course, our administrator for NASA is here in the firing room. He checked in with the launch director, chatted with her for several minutes, and he's here in the firing room, which is a good positive sign, of course, for the day. That's it for the firing room. We'll send it back now to Megan and Nicole.
Daryl, thank you so much. Yeah, let's get back into the suit-up room here, where we now have a shot of all 4 astronauts, and it appears all of them are undergoing their suit leak checks. Can you talk to us about what that is, Nicole?
Sure, yeah, you can see, you know, as the suit expands, that we're going to pressurize those suits. So in the case that we need it, if we lose pressure in the capsule, those suits will protect the astronauts and keep them pressurized and keep them survivable. So these guys are going to hold their breath for about 10 seconds. You know, any movement in the suit could cause changes in the pressure, and so we want to get a really nice, precise, accurate measurement on the leak check. And so they'll hold their breath. You know, even just their heartbeat could potentially make some differences in those super sensitive sensors there. So you can see the red and blue valves there, the air in and air out, and it looks like Victor just had a good leak check.
Yeah, and actually they do 3 leak checks, again, just to get an average reading to say, hey, you know, we have confidence that these suits are holding the right pressure. As Nicole said, that tube that's going in, that's putting air into their suits, and then there was that gold instrument that you saw on their other side. That's how they can control how much pressure is being released in order to do these checks.
Yep, and they will do the leak checks here in the suit room, and then they'll do more actually in the capsule as well. They'll do another leak check. So we're going to make sure the suits are ready to go before we even step out the door, and then we'll check them with the entire system on the capsule once they get out to the rocket.
And you might also notice that some of the astronauts, while they're doing their suit leak checks, you might have seen Victor gave an okay sign. You might also see a thumbs up, and that's because concurrently, while they're doing these suit leak checks, they're also doing comm checks.
Yes, yeah, we talked about the comm cap earlier, and the umbilical and how they plug in. So yeah, they're going to test the comm, they're going to test the suit, make sure everything. They're actually probably testing the cooling system as well right now. You know, they're going to plug into the portable cooling system and make sure that all of that is working. So like I said, we want to make sure that we've got 4 healthy suits before we go out.
Yeah, this suit, 3 layers, so obviously it can get hot.
Yes.
So one of the layers is a cooling undergarment, and basically they flow cold liquid through that undergarment to keep the astronauts cool and comfortable before liftoff today.
Yeah, it's like a onesie with a bunch of tubes running around it, and the water flows through there to cool you down.
All right, lots of information to share with you all today. If you have any questions, we'd love to hear from you. All you have to do is send your questions our way by tagging @NASA Artemis, and we'll try to answer as many of your questions live. And we'll also have some questions for you throughout the broadcast, so we hope you can participate in those opportunities as well. Okay, as we continue to be inside the suit-up room here, why don't we learn a little bit about each of our crew members? Right now, we are looking at pilot Victor Glover, but hopefully we can get a shot here of our commander, Reed Wiseman. Now, Reed Wiseman is a Baltimore native. He's been in space once before as flight engineer for Expedition 41 aboard the International Space Station from May through November 2014. During the 165-day mission, Reed and his crewmates completed, get this, more than 300 science experiments in areas like human physiology, medicine, physical science, earth science, and also astrophysics. They actually set a milestone for station science by completing a record 82 research hours in a single week. He also served as chief of NASA's astronaut office from December 2020 to November 2022, and Reed has 2 daughters.
Yeah, you know, I love, Reed is such a great leader. He was the chief of the astronaut office when they hired our class of astronauts. And so, you know, I think I have to publicly thank him for, for my job here today. But yeah, he's a family man, he's a good leader, and he's a great pick for the commander of this mission.
Yeah, I think, you know, in talking through some of his other accomplishments, obviously he has leadership qualities that makes him prepared for commander of Artemis II.
Yes, yes, he does. He's a well-experienced naval officer and now NASA astronaut.
And so now here we are, pilot Victor Glover. NASA selected the California native as an astronaut in 2013. At the time, he was actually serving as a legislative fellow in the United States Senate. His first trip to space was in November 2020 when he launched as pilot of NASA's SpaceX Crew 1 mission. That was the first operational mission of NASA's Commercial Crew Program, which resumed launching American rockets from American soil to the International Space Station at the end of the shuttle program. Victor is a U.S. Navy captain and naval aviator who served as a test pilot, racking up more than 3,500 flight hours in more than 40 different aircraft. He and his wife, Deanna, have 4 children.
Yeah, 4 children, a lot of energy, but that checks, right? Because when I think of Victor Glover, I think of a lot of energy, smart guy who's always excited and ready to go. And there you go, he's smiling in the suit room this morning.
Oh yeah, he's a great guy. All of them are. This whole entire crew, they're just a good group of human beings, of leaders, of friends, family. You know, I have never heard anybody say anything bad about any of these 4. They're also well accomplished, and they're also deserving of this opportunity to return to the moon.
Yeah, and they're also humble, right? They're just standard humans going to the moon, but you would never know that when you talk to them in a normal conversation.
And so it looks like Christina here has completed her suit leak checks as well, her communication checks too.
Yep, they've already got her gloves off. They're getting ready to kind of hang out and relax a little bit, I think, before they walk out.
She is a mission specialist for this mission, native of Grand Rapids, Michigan, was selected to the Astronaut Corps in 2013, so actually same class as Victor. She served as flight engineer on the International Space Station from March 2019 to February 2020. And during that time, Cook set a record for the longest single space flight by a woman with a total of 328 consecutive days in space. She also participated in the first ever all-female spacewalk. And before becoming an astronaut, Christina helped build space science instruments and led scientific field work in some of the most remote environments on the planet. Her hobbies include surfing, rock climbing, community service, yoga, travel, and photography. Again, so much. When does she find the time?
That's a great question. You know, one of the things I love about Christina is that she's broken records and she's achieved all these milestones. But one of the things that she talks about is, you know, she just wants people to set goals and go work hard and do something that's meaningful to you. And she really hopes that her records are broken as soon as possible. She does it for her family, and she'll talk about all of her nieces and nephews quite a bit. So just, again, another example of just a humble human who's got a great support system in her family and excited for the mission.
Yeah, she's always saying that she just wants the opportunity to push people farther, to push humanity farther, see what we can accomplish together. So, yeah. Again, all 4 of them say that. They're really in tune on what they think or what they feel like their role is in this mission.
Yeah, I think their legacy is going to be, providing the shoulders for others to climb on.
And last but not least, first-time flyer, Canadian Space Agency astronaut Jeremy Hansen will fly to the moon as a mission specialist on the Artemis II mission. The London, Ontario native was selected as an astronaut in 2009. After that, he worked as Capcom at NASA's Mission Control Center in Houston. Capcom stands for Capsule Communicator, and that's the sole direct voice communicating with astronauts in space. He also participated in training exercises such as living on the ocean floor off the coast of Florida to simulate deep space exploration for 7 days. In 2017, he became the first Canadian to lead a NASA astronaut class. He also enjoys getting out on a sailboat, rock climbing, and mountain biking. Jeremy and his wife, Catherine, have 3 children, and he actually got to hang out with them over the weekend. So the crew arrived here for launch at Kennedy Space Center on Friday, and then their family members arrived Saturday.
Yes, yeah. As long as their family can quarantine with them, then they will stay, quarantined in Houston, and then they all fly down to Kennedy Space Center, and then you get to spend the last few days with your close family and friends. We actually do a behind-the-glass visit with some of those other maybe extended family members that couldn't quarantine with you. But yeah, it's a quaint time here once you get to Kennedy Space Center.
A great sign here, all 4 astronauts have removed their helmets, and that indicates again that all 4 have completed suit leak checks. And so, Nicole, what they're doing now is they have these pockets on their forearms. That's just somewhere where they can put personal items that they might want, right?
Yeah, just kind of stowage pockets. There's always something that you might need or want while you're in the capsule, and then also last-minute personal items if you want to put a couple things in there. So everybody kind of has their own unique stash in their pockets.
And then another pocket has emergency equipment that they might need, right? Like a signaling mirror, things like that.
Right, yeah, the suit is basically all in one. It's got the oxygen bottles there on their right legs. You'll see in a different shot, they've got pockets with survival gear in it, and that is to keep them safe. So if they had to egress the capsule, either from the launch pad or from the water, then they will have all of the survival gear with them. They'll have about 10 minutes of oxygen as well from that bottle so that they can get to safety quickly and safely.
We are now 5 hours, 3 minutes and counting from the opening of our 2-hour launch window, and we have our first questions from social media. Question here from X. So to be clear, this is not a mission to land, but to orbit the moon. Thank you, and thank our astronauts. Nicole.
Yeah, this is a great question. I think it's important to highlight the mission of Artemis II, where we are going to go around the moon. We're going to see the far side of the moon. We're going to see parts of the far side of the moon that human eyes have never seen before. It's very similar to the Apollo 8 mission, right? We're also potentially going to be able to see the landing sites for the future Artemis missions and kind of provide the overall context of those landing sites amongst the entire moon site there. So it's an exciting mission. We'll get to learn a ton about there's so much science that's going to be on this mission as well, right? Where they're going to do some science experiments on humans, learn about the stress of the environment, and we're going to learn about the radiation environment. We're going to learn about the suits as well. We've got some technology demonstrations that are going to happen. So there's a lot going on this mission as we fly around the moon and come back.
Mm-hmm. We always say it's about increments, right? Like we're making that next giant leap to Mars, but in order to do that safely and to do that thoroughly, incremental steps.
Exactly. And, like we said, this is the first time that we've put crew on this rocket. And so actually before we even head to the moon, right, we're going to stay close to the Earth, and we're going to check out all of the systems on Orion, make sure that it can handle 4 humans, make sure it can handle people sleeping, people exercising, all of the environmental control systems are working. So we want to make sure that the capsule is safe for the crew before we send them, almost 250,000 miles away.
Yeah, that was a great question. And we actually have another one that we'll pull up on screen here. Another question from X. How long will it take them to reach the moon, and how long will the entire mission last?
Another great question, right? So they're going to do a couple orbits around the Earth. They'll do a perigee and an apogee raise burn. What that means is that they're going to accelerate to get further away from the Earth, and they'll get into a really highly elliptical orbit first. And then once they get into the translunar injection, so they're actually on a free return trajectory, which means we're going to accelerate them, and then they're going to escape Earth's gravity, and then just based on orbital mechanics, they'll be able to come home without having to do another burn or acceleration. So it'll take about 4 days once they leave Earth's gravity to get to the moon. They'll fly around the moon, about 4 days back, and then land. So overall, about a 10-day mission.
Exactly. Yeah, these are really great questions, guys. We know that, again, we are sharing a lot of information today, so please do not hesitate to reach out. Obviously, Nicole, very smart here, and we're happy to answer any of your questions. Again, tag at NASA Artemis wherever you're watching this coverage. And now we actually have a question for you. Who would you take with you on a trip around the moon? Would it be your bestie? Would it be a pet, family member, or a seasoned astronaut?
Ooh,
Think about that one. I know.
I like that.
I absolutely know what I would say. I think it would make my husband upset, but I have my answer here. But we'd love for you to go to NASA's Instagram or Twitch accounts to vote. Again, who would you take to the moon with you? Bestie, pet, family, or seasoned astronaut? Try to go vote, and then we will share your answers soon. Again, husband is not gonna like my answer. And we're not the only ones with questions today. We will also hear from celebrities during our launch coverage. See what Stanley Tucci, Scarlett Johansson, and others want to know about NASA's Artemis II test flight. Plus the surprise of a lifetime as kids marveled at the rocket and spacecraft rolling to the launch pad. Look at those cute faces there. Oh, I love that. Love those suits. And we'll show you how the astronauts will eat, sleep, and go to the bathroom while in space. Keep in mind, the Orion spacecraft is about the size of a 6-person tent.
Yeah, not super big, but, you know, it's 10 days with your 3 best friends, so I think it's manageable for sure. But, you know, every ounce counts when you're trying to get to the moon.
And as we continue to look into the suit-up room here, a fist pump for some of the folks in the crowd there by Victor. Why don't we take a look around the center here? We know that there are some folks who are already getting ready to check out the team here as they drive across KSC to their launch pad. Look at that. Oh, that's so awesome.
That's a great crowd.
They're waiting there in front of the vehicle assembly building. So actually, they're just down the road from us. This is a good crowd, as Nicole said. Oh, there they are. They just got their cue. Oh, now? Let me wave now.
Oh, yeah, they are excited.
That's amazing. So all of these folks, content creators that are getting behind-the-scenes access as part of NASA's NASA social experience here. So as you can see, very excited. The crew will get into their convoy and drive past them here pretty shortly.
Yeah, what an amazing way to share the Artemis story, right? By inviting these social media experts out to share the story as they drive by.
All right, again, let's take a look at the clock. 4 hours, 58 minutes and counting from the opening of today's 2-hour launch window. So why don't we check back in with Daryl with the launch team.
Megan and Nicole, and inside Fire Room 1, I'm listening to Launch Director Charlie Blackwell Thompson greet the ascent crew who just came on console over there at Johnson Space Center. So good to have the mission control team jumping on with us. So far, the launch team here in the firing room has had a really good morning. Really smooth tanking that kicked off at 7:30 a.m. this morning. They got to all stages replenish just before 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern time, and it was an incredibly smooth tanking. That's great as we look here watching the crew and also with an eye on the rocket. Weather, of course, we've talked a little bit about that. It's favorable overall, 80% go for our 2-hour window between 6:24 p.m. and 8:24 p.m. We don't have an exact T0 right now because that's going to come to us closer when we get closer to launch, roughly about 20 minutes before liftoff. But it's going to be within that window. And towards the beginning, beginning, provided everything continues to go smoothly along the timeline. And so far, that's been the case. I mentioned that there was a small issue in my previous live hit. That actually was incorrect. There was no issue. I've gotten the good data now that I'm on the headset and listening into the loops. Avionics engineers are keeping an eye on a display unit inside Orion that's just running a little cooler than normal. It's not going out of limit. It's actually completely fine. But they just were noting the trend and reported that to the NASA test director. So they'll keep their eyes on that. But again, there was no LCC violation. And once they get the cover off Orion out there that's protecting it from the rain, they expect the temperatures inside the Orion crew capsule to stabilize. And with that, we'll send it back to the host desk with Megan and Nicole.
Thank you so much, Daryl. Now, Daryl is inside Firing Room 1 in the Launch Control Center, or LCC, as you might hear it referred to, which was built in 1967 to support Apollo missions. In fact, Apollo 11, the mission that landed on the moon in 1969, that was called from the exact same firing room. NASA then upgraded the LCC to support shuttle missions, and now Artemis. You can see there a shot from when we supported shuttle. Now with Artemis, the primary launch team for today is in Firing Room 1, but there is actually support staff in Firing Room 2 as well. And together they will propel this ambitious test flight off Earth.
We're going back to the moon because it's the next step in our journey to Mars. We need to go explore the moon. There's vast regions of unexplored areas with the coldest, darkest places in our solar system. This is a test mission, and when we get off the planet, we might come right back home. We might spend 3 or 4 days around Earth. We might go to the moon. That's where we want to go, but it is a test mission, and we are ready for every scenario as we ride this amazing space launch system in the Orion spacecraft.
But another reason we're going back to the moon is to fulfill NASA's mission, which is to explore the unknown in air and space, to innovate for the benefit of humanity, and to inspire the world through discovery. And when we succeed and when we accomplish the things that we set out to accomplish, that